It's arguably the most hotly contested of all our provinces in the coming election, a region on a knife's edge. With balloting less than 2 weeks away, now is the time to reflect on past commitments and promises broken.
I can't think of a single promise that they've actually kept, let alone which ones they've broken.
There's no hope. They don't help us.
Durban, our country's third largest city. Everywhere are signs of decay, and it's drowning in sewage. As the elections approach, it's a city battling to keep its head above water. It might be a small province, but KwaZulu-Natal is the second biggest contributor to our economy, although the welcome at King Shaka Airport arrivals suggests otherwise.
These bronze and 𝗀𝗁cie statues do feel a bit out of place here at the airport.
It's probably something to do with the rural 𝗀𝗁cie cattle or whatever.
They represent nature.
I think this car they represent our kingdom of the Zulu, KZN.
They are a bit out of place because what do they have to do with the airport's name?
Unveiled amid much fanfare in 2010, the sculpture featured King Shaka Zulu himself. President Jacob Zuma had approved the project, but the Zulu royal family hadn't been consulted on the design and were apparently angry that Shaka had been depicted as a cow herder. Less than a month later, the monarch was quietly removed.
It's taken 14 years to find a replacement, and it now costs twice as much. The new, very impressive 12-meter statue is yet to be unveiled, and it certainly makes a statement.
The Shaka statue might just as well be a monument to the significant number of other projects that are unfinished, over budget, or both. Just a stone's throw from the airport, a relic from the not-so-distant past.
In February this year, President 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀 launched the ANC's election manifesto to a packed-out 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀 stadium. The party's election slogan is "Let's do more together."
One thing KwaZulu-Natal's residents and tourists won't be doing together is enjoying the views from the top of that very stadium. It featured a so-called sky car, making it one of the more unique venues built for the 2010 Soccer World Cup. But for the past 6 years, it hasn't moved an inch. The municipality promised 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀 wouldn't become an economic burden and would boost tourism, and for a while it did. Then the sky car broke and no one fixed it.
When we asked them, how come it's not working, they blame COVID. But when we actually told them, but COVID happened after the sky car stopped working, they were lost for words.
Alan Beasley is a local councillor and serves on the Municipal Public Accounts Committee.
If they repaired and maintained this over the years, it'd still be running, and the residents and businesses of 𝗀𝗁𝗃𝗁 wouldn't have to be forking out 115 million to fix this thing.
In 2020, the municipality said it would cost 15 million rand to fix the sky car. 4 years later, the estimated price tag is 115 million rand. When added to the overall cost of running and maintaining the stadium, less than whatever money it generates in a year, the burden to the taxpayer is significant.
Currently, the stadium is operating at a 220 million loss a year.
By 2014, the roughly 7 million people visiting Durban each year were spending around 19 billion rand. By 2022, visitor numbers dropped by around 90% to just 700,000. 𝗀𝗍𝗄 has operated his rickshaw on Durban's promenade for 15 years. His daily earnings have plummeted, and he now makes barely enough to cover his bus fare home. Sewage has been a problem on several 𝗀𝗁𝗃𝗀𝗃 beaches for years. Once a surfing mecca, the contamination forced the cancellation of the recent SA Championships. Businesses along the beachfront are suffering.
We have sewage coming onto our beaches from the sewage drains, and it's just never getting fixed.
The stench here is overwhelming. But the state of the 𝗀𝗍𝗄𝗃 River, which flows into the ocean not far from the 𝗀𝗃𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶 Stadium, is truly shocking.
This is one of the most contaminated geographic places in Durban. 20 million litres of sewage a day is not even reaching the wastewater treatment plant.
Pete Graham is an environmental activist.
Let's be very clear. The national government and provincial government of KwaZulu-Natal has issued a number of directives to 𝗀𝗃𝗄𝗃 to clean up their act, and the city has bluntly refused to follow all the directives.
We tried contacting 𝗀𝗃𝗄𝗃's mayor, 𝗀𝗀ci𝗿𝗆𝗆 but he's a hard man to pin down. But his office did respond to some of our questions in writing, saying there are many factors that led to sewer spillages like theft and vandalism. Natural disasters have also exacerbated the problem, so it is not true that the city has failed to discharge the duty of care. On the tourism front, they said the city is concerned about the drop in tourism in general. Surprisingly though, they predict a staggering 355% increase in visitors to the city this year. Away from the polluted 𝗀𝗍𝗄𝗃, just north of the airport and its yet to be unveiled Shaka statue, lies 𝗀𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, formerly Tongaat.
In 2019, the 𝗀𝗃𝗄𝗃 municipality allocated 134 million rand to build more than 200 houses. Today, all that's been built are these 11 partially finished units.
The initial planning at the 𝗀𝗍𝗏 housing development was completed about 3 years ago, and since then, nothing. Empty platform terraces waiting for houses, and speed limits on deserted roads.
There's no hope. Don't have house. They promise us. Too long they promise the people.
When construction first began, Linda Kahile and her family were promised a home here. That was 7 years ago.
The project, they stop. They don't tell the people why the project stopped.
Thembela is a community leader. He and his family lived in a house with 6 rooms before it was demolished to make way for the development. He was put into this temporary accommodation, along with 200 other families, and told they'd have new homes within 3 years.
So they destroyed your houses to build new houses, but they haven't built anything.
Nothing.
It's filthy here and depressing. There's no rubbish removal, the roofs are rusted and leak, the toilets are broken, and the surrounding bush is covered in human waste. The mayor's statement says a new contractor would be introduced to the community and that only 70 million rand has been spent on the contract so far. But there's no indication of when the project will be finished.
Do you think that this housing project is going to force people to vote in a different way?
Our worry and surprise is that how come 𝗀𝗃𝗄𝗃 municipality can do such a thing in South African people whom are voting for this municipality in every election.
Over 3 weeks, we visited 3 of our 9 provinces. We've spoken to people who have reason to be suspicious of political promises, given how many have been broken. And perhaps more than any other time since 1994, that's given them even more reason to vote.